In the drawing-room of Cleeve Manor, silence reigned with an oppressive grace. The fire burned low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows upon ancestral portraits, their oil-painted eyes seeming to watch the proceedings with disapproval. Outside, the wind carried the whisper of the moors, lonely and unrepentant. And yet it was not nature's voice that unsettled the occupants within, but a human absence. Miss Violet Willoughby, only daughter of the late Sir Reginald Willoughby, had vanished. She had been seen that morning, descending the marble staircase in her dove-grey dressing-gown, murmuring something about sending a wire to her solicitor. Her voice had been calm, her hair pinned with the usual perfection. At 9:30, she'd entered the breakfast-room. The cook swore she heard her request a soft-boiled egg, and by 10 o'clock, Violet Willoughby had ceased to exist. It was not the kind of disappearance that brought search parties or bloodhounds. There was no broken window, no bloodied scarf. Her bedroom was undisturbed, her luggage untouched. Her pet spaniel, Lottie, sat mournfully at the foot of her bed, head tilted as though in mourning. And perhaps most disturbingly, her personal cheque-book, bound in red leather, was gone. "Vanished," said Mrs. Beatrice Pennington, Violet's great-aunt, with a sniff and a stiff clutch of her handkerchief. Not kidnapped, not murdered, mind you. Simply vanished, as if she had never existed at all. Colonel Archibald Pennington, her husband, tugged at his moustache, clearly more annoyed than alarmed. Damn nonsense. The girl's run off with some artist, no doubt. She's always had a rebellious streak. "No ransom note, no demands," murmured Inspector Chedwick of the local constabulary, rubbing his chin as he surveyed the high-ceilinged room. And yet, no trace either. It was then that Mr. Alfred Willoughby, Violet's cousin and presumed heir should she remain unfound, spoke up. He was a slender man, with neatly parted hair and a voice as smooth as silk. "Forgive me, Inspector, but I've taken the liberty of contacting a specialist, someone with a reputation for delicacy and discretion. I believe he will bring clarity to this curious business." And indeed, as if summoned by theatrical cue, the butler entered at that very moment. "Mr. Hercule Poirot has arrived, sir." All heads turned toward the door as a small, fastidious man stepped into the drawing-room, his waxed mustache impeccable, his patent leather shoes unblemished by the muddy drive. Poirot bowed slightly, then looked about the room with an expression that suggested he had already noted 15 things that others had missed. "I am Hercule Poirot," he said in his soft Belgian accent, "and I've come to find the lady who has decided she no longer wishes to be found." 2 hours later, Poirot stood alone in Violet's bedroom, his gloved fingers brushing lightly along the ivory keys of her writing desk. The surface was spotless, though a pale rectangle marked where a letter might have rested for some time. A slight indentation in the blotter. An uncapped fountain pen. Bone white with a gold nib. The ink, he noted, was dry. He turned to Lottie, who sat dutifully at the foot of the bed. She let out a low whine. "Ah, ma pauvre petite," Poirot said gently. "You know, don't you? Dogs, how you say, do not lie." He crouched beside the dog and examined the worn carpet near the bedside. A faint smear of soot, oddly out of place, as if someone had stepped directly from the hearth. Yet the fire had been unlit that morning. Poirot's gaze drifted to the ornate fireplace. He rose, inspecting the back of the hearth. There, behind the iron grate, was a small trail of ash where something had recently burned, something narrow, perhaps parchment or a single envelope. "Curious," he murmured. "To disappear is one thing, but to burn only one piece of correspondence before doing so. Ah, mademoiselle, you're telling me something. You're making a little stage, yes?" He turned as the door creaked open and Inspector Chedwick entered. "Anything of note, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot smiled faintly. "But of course, I've learned several things already. Firstly, Mademoiselle Willoughby intended her disappearance to appear accidental, or at least spontaneous. Secondly, she left behind no farewell but took care to destroy exactly one item before leaving. And thirdly, he paused, inspecting the full-length mirror. She was not alone when she left. The Willoughby Circle. By dinner, Poirot had requested a formal meeting with all present members of the Willoughby household. A psychological portrait was beginning to take shape in his mind. A portrait composed not in oil, but in contradiction. Present were Mrs. Beatrice Pennington, the matriarchal aunt with old-fashioned sensibilities and a brisk distaste for impropriety. Colonel Archibald Pennington, loud and blustery, who once served in India and believed women should be seen, but not heard. Alfred Willoughby, the urbane cousin who smiled with his mouth, but never with his eyes. Miss Georgina Latham, Violet's childhood companion, and now her secretary, prim and sweet, with a voice like a school bell. Mr. Ernest Brackley, the family's solicitor, who wore his pince-nez like a badge of honor and had known Violet since she was a girl. Dr. Roland Trevors, the local physician, young and soft-spoken with a kind of awkward reverence when Violet's name was mentioned. Each had reasons for concern, though none admitted fear. Poirot opened the gathering with a mild tone but firm eyes. Let us speak of Mademoiselle Willoughby, who, we presume, has left of her own volition. But why should a woman of independent means, of beauty, of intelligence, choose to vanish into the mist without so much as a bon voyage? Colonel Pennington cleared his throat. Because she was a stubborn little— Please, monsieur, allow the question to hang in the air a little longer. Poirot began his methodical interviews that evening, one by one, behind the drawing-room's closed doors. He asked about Violet's habits, her friends, her fears, but also her recent letters, her emotional state, her opinions on inheritance and solitude. With each response, Poirot took a mental note, not only of what was said, but how it was said. A flicker of the eye, a misplaced pronoun, a contradiction in timeline. Tell me, Miss Latham, he asked the secretary, was Mademoiselle Willoughby in good spirits yesterday? Oh, yes, Georgina said quickly. Why do you ask? Because, Poirot said, smiling thinly, your eyes are red from crying. And so, as the grandfather clock struck 10 and the wind howled once more across the northern moors, Poirot leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressed together. The first scene had been set and the first move made, but the game, he knew, had only just begun. The storm outside had intensified as Poirot's questions probed deeper into the lives of the Willoughby household. The flickering gaslights cast long shadows against the walls of Cleeve Manor, and the low hum of conversation from the drawing-room seemed to echo throughout the otherwise silent house. Poirot had finished his brief interviews, and each person's discomfort had only deepened the detective's suspicions. The woman who had vanished was no ordinary heiress. She had been a woman of precision and complexity, the very kind of individual Poirot relished understanding. As he walked slowly back toward the drawing-room, he allowed the cool evening air to settle his thoughts. The clues were starting to align, and yet there remained a thick fog of uncertainty that hung over the case, clouding the logical path. He needed more than just a sense of unease. He needed to uncover the truth, hidden beneath layers of polite conversation and carefully crafted facades. The assembled family and servants in the drawing-room fell into an uneasy silence as Poirot re-entered. He stood at the door for a moment, surveying the room, taking in the subtle nuances of each individual. They shifted under his gaze, anxious, as if each of them had been caught in some private misdeed. Now, we shall speak plainly, Poirot said, his voice calm yet firm. Mademoiselle Viollet Willoughby has left, but why? Why would a young woman of wealth, privilege, and independence choose to disappear without leaving a trace? Not a word, not a note, not a clue. This is not the action of a simple girl running away. Alfred Willoughby shifted in his chair, his fingers nervously drumming the armrest. Perhaps she had her reasons. You don't know her, Poirot. You don't know what she was like. She was headstrong. Sometimes people just go, don't they? Poirot's eyes narrowed as he studied Alfred's face. The man's voice wavered ever so slightly, a hair's breadth of unease that only Poirot could detect. Ah, monsieur, but the headstrong are often the ones who leave behind the most evidence, and yet Mademoiselle Willoughby has left nothing of the sort. It is unnatural. The solicitor, Mr. Ernest Brackley, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Surely, Poirot, you don't mean to suggest that something untoward has happened to her. She may have simply grown weary of the attention of the household, perhaps decided to take some time away. I've seen it happen before. Poirot tilted his head, considering the solicitor's words. You are right, Monsieur Brackley. It has happened before. But in this case, I think not. Because, you see, I have found something curious in the room of Mademoiselle Willoughby. The room seemed to tense, every individual hanging on his words. Poirot took his time, not to prolong the suspense, but to allow his audience to settle into the inevitable discomfort of their secrets. I found a letter, Poirot continued, his voice low and deliberate. A letter that was destroyed. A single piece of correspondence was torn, burned, yet the residue remains. A small detail, one that could easily be overlooked, but I noticed it. And so I ask, what was in that letter? Who was the recipient, and why was it so urgent that it be disposed of in such a manner? Mrs. Pennington, her hands folded tightly in her lap, shifted uncomfortably. What are you implying, Poirot? That Violet had some sort of secret? I imply nothing, Poirot said, raising a finger as he scanned the room. But I do know this. Secrets are often the most potent motivators for action, even when one would prefer not to act. Mademoiselle Willoughby was not the sort of woman to disappear on a whim. She was too calculated, too precise. Poirot's eyes moved slowly across the faces of the room's occupants. He stopped on Miss Georgina Latham, whose tear-streaked face seemed out of place amidst the otherwise collected group. Miss Latham, Poirot said softly, you were close to Mademoiselle Willoughby. Very close, I understand. I would like to know what you were doing when she left. Georgina seemed to hesitate, her eyes flickering nervously between Poirot and the others. I don't know what you mean. I was in my room when she left. And what were you doing in your room? Poirot's voice was gentle, almost coaxing. I was reading a letter from Violet, Georgina said, her voice cracking. She stopped herself, quickly looking away, but Poirot had already caught the small admission. And why did you not tell me this earlier? Poirot asked, his voice still calm, but now laced with the unmistakable sound of scrutiny. I didn't think it mattered, she replied quickly, her hands twisting in her lap. It was just a letter. Personal? Nothing important. Poirot remained silent for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. Her reaction, her avoidance of the question, spoke volumes more than her words themselves. He had seen it too many times, the subtle tensing of the shoulders, the quick flicker of the eyes. Georgina knew more than she was letting on. But what exactly? And what did the letter say, Miss Latham? Poirot asked softly, his gaze never leaving her face. I can't remember, Georgina said quickly, her voice growing more strained. It was nothing, really. Poirot stepped closer to her. I think you do remember, Miss Latham. I think you remember more than you realize. Georgina's breath quickened as Poirot leaned in just slightly, his presence becoming overpowering. I will not press you, but I would suggest you remember very carefully. The truth always comes out, mademoiselle, in one way or another. There was a long, pregnant silence before Georgina finally spoke. her voice a whisper. "It was from her solicitor. She was planning to leave. She wanted to disappear, to escape." "And why?" Poirot asked, his voice steady. "What was her reason?" Georgina looked away, her face flushed. "I don't know. She never told me. She just made the arrangements. She said she was tired of everything. She wanted to start fresh, somewhere else." Poirot's mind was already racing, piecing together the puzzle. It was clear now. Violet Willoughby had been planning something far more deliberate than a mere disappearance. She had arranged it. But who had she been planning to disappear from? "And what else?" Poirot asked, sensing there was more she was not saying. Georgina hesitated. There was something about money. She was going to transfer a large sum to someone who had helped her. "Who?" Poirot pressed, leaning in closer. "I don't know," Georgina said, almost pleading. "I don't know, I swear." Poirot stood upright, stepping back with a small, thoughtful nod. "Very well, Miss Latham. You have been helpful. For now." As he turned to address the others in the room, his mind was already assembling the next pieces of the puzzle. A planned disappearance, a financial transaction. But for what purpose? And who stood to gain? Poirot was certain now. Someone in this room knew more than they were letting on. It was time to play the game, carefully, deliberately, and expose the truth hiding beneath the surface of their polished exteriors. The investigation had taken its first step into darker, more complicated territory. And as Poirot turned to leave the drawing room, his thoughts were clear. The heiress had not just vanished. She had paid to disappear. And that, Poirot knew, was just the beginning. The evening had deepened, and the wind outside howled like a restless spirit. Cleeve Manor, normally so grand and imposing, now felt a little smaller, more intimate, even suffocating. The guests and servants who remained were all too aware of the tension in the air, though none of them spoke of it aloud. Poirot, however, had no intention of letting the matter rest. There were too many loose ends, too many inconsistencies. Each new revelation twisted the knot of the mystery tighter, but it had not yet unraveled. The last thread he needed to pull was a delicate one. Violet Willoughby's disappearance was no ordinary case. A young woman of her wealth and social standing had the world at her feet, yet instead of following the path of least resistance, she had decided to disappear. She had arranged it meticulously, through a letter, through financial means, and yet she had not told a soul. Someone had helped her, someone who held a key to this puzzle, and Poirot would find out who that was. Poirot retired to his small study, taking no more than a cursory glance at the papers on the desk. It was the quiet time he needed to think, to allow the little grey cells to work their magic. As he sat, he replayed the conversation with Miss Georgina Latham in his mind, picking apart every word, every hesitation, every nuance in her voice. He was convinced that she had told him only part of the story, but how to get the rest? There was a knock at the door. "Enter," Poirot called, without turning his head. He knew it was not a servant. There was something in the manner of the knock that gave it away. Alfred Willoughby stepped into the room, his face drawn with anxiety. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Ah, Monsieur Willoughby, what brings you to me at this hour?" Poirot asked, his voice still warm, but with an underlying sharpness. He had no tolerance for games, not now. Alfred closed the door behind him and stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly as he clasped them together. "I wanted to speak with you, Poirot, in private. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about Violet." Poirot's expression softened, though his mind remained focused. "You are concerned about your niece, Monsieur Willoughby. I understand. It is natural when someone you care for disappears, but I must caution you. There is more to this than simply her leaving. There are motivations, actions, choices that we must explore." Alfred nodded, but his gaze seemed far away, as though he were wrestling with his own thoughts. I know. I think I know who was behind it." Poirot leaned forward in his chair. "Ah, now we are getting to the heart of the matter. Who, Monsieur Willoughby? Who do you believe was behind this?" Alfred hesitated for a moment, his lips pressed tightly together. "It was Mrs. Pennington," he finally said, his voice low. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Pennington? But surely you do not mean to accuse her without proof. I have already spoken with her, and she seems to know nothing of it." "I know," Alfred said quickly, pacing the room. "Now. But she was the one who encouraged Violet to take that trip, to disappear, as it were. She said Violet needed to get away from everything, from the pressures of society, from the men who pursued her. Mrs. Pennington always had a way with words, a way of persuading people. She's not what she seems." Poirot nodded slowly, processing the information. Mrs. Pennington had indeed struck him as an interesting character, a woman of wealth, of influence, yet with a cold, calculating air about her. He had not dismissed her as a suspect, but he had not yet settled his mind on her role in this matter. "I see," Poirot said quietly, choosing his words carefully. "So you believe Mrs. Pennington was involved in Violet's decision to vanish? But why? What was her motive?" "I don't know," Alfred replied, his voice tight. "But there's something about her. She's too interested in Violet's affairs, always asking questions, always offering advice. And then, when Violet disappeared, Mrs. Pennington was the one who seemed the least concerned. She didn't panic the way the rest of us did." Poirot considered this interesting. "And did Mrs. Pennington mention anything about the letter, the one Violet received before she disappeared?" Alfred looked up sharply. "The letter? You know about that?" Poirot nodded, his fingers steepled before him. "Yes, I do. It was addressed to Violet from her solicitor. I have spoken with Miss Latham about it. She told me it was a letter about Violet's plans to disappear, a plan to escape, if you will." Alfred paled. That's exactly what I was afraid of. Mrs. Pennington, she's the only one who could have known about Violet's plans. She must have convinced her to go along with it." Poirot raised a hand. "Not so fast, Monsieur Willoughby. There is something that troubles me. If Violet had decided to disappear, why would she leave a letter, and why would she involve a solicitor? A woman like her, who could easily vanish without a trace, would not leave such a paper trail behind." Alfred paused, his face wrinkling in confusion. "You mean the letter wasn't real?" "I do not know yet," Poirot said, "but I intend to find out. I must speak with the solicitor. If there is any connection between him and Violet's disappearance, it would be there." Alfred nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "Do you think Mrs. Pennington is involved in something more sinister?" Poirot stood from his chair, smoothing his jacket. "That is for me to determine, but I will need your help, Monsieur Willoughby. You must continue to observe her, to watch her movements. If she is behind this, she will reveal herself soon enough." Alfred nodded, albeit reluctantly. "Of course, I will do whatever I can." Poirot's eyes sparkled with a mixture of determination and excitement. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, one by one. The heiress had not simply vanished. She had orchestrated her disappearance. But why? And who had assisted her? Poirot's instincts told him that Mrs. Pennington was more than just a mere advisor. She was central to this mystery. But there was one thing Poirot knew for sure. Violet Willoughby's disappearance was not a simple case of running away. It was far more complicated than that. And as he left the study to prepare for his next move, the shadows of the evening seemed to grow darker, as if even the house itself were holding its breath, waiting for the next step in the unfolding drama. The following morning was a quiet one, the sky still overcast and the wind persisting, as if nature itself were intent on cloaking the house in a perpetual sense of unease. Poirot had spent the night reviewing his notes, making mental connections, and waiting for something, a single clue, a revelation that might shift the entire investigation into focus. He had always known that the most critical aspects of a case were often those that appeared the least important, and it was with this mindset that he approached his next steps. The sun had barely risen when Poirot found himself once again in the drawing-room of Cleeve Manor. Mrs. Pennington was there, seated with perfect posture, as though the ongoing investigation were little more than a minor inconvenience in the grand scheme of her day. Her composure was almost unnerving. She greeted Poirot with a cool smile, the kind that suggested she had not a care in the world. "Monsieur Poirot," she said smoothly, her voice a soft purr, "I trust you have made some progress in your investigation." Poirot studied her carefully. There was something about her, too composed, too unflustered. She was not the type to lose control, and in a case such as this, where emotions ran high and secrets were ever present, her calm demeanor raised red flags. The fact that she was still so at ease suggested she knew far more than she had let on. But Poirot was patient. He had learned long ago that the most powerful answers often came from silence. "Ah, madame," he said, his voice polite but firm. "Progress is, as always, a matter of patience. I'm not one to rush conclusions. I prefer instead to observe closely." Mrs. Pennington's eyes narrowed slightly, but she maintained her smile. "I do appreciate a man of method, Monsieur Poirot. It is what makes you such a successful investigator." Poirot leaned forward, his gaze fixed on her. "I must ask you about Mademoiselle Willoughby, madame. Her sudden disappearance is quite the puzzle. You seem to have known her well." Mrs. Pennington's face remained impassive, but Poirot caught the briefest flicker of tension around her eyes. "I knew Violet, yes. She was a dear friend, though I cannot say I understood her every action. She was unpredictable at times." "Unpredictable, yes," Poirot agreed. "But in matters of such importance, madam, people are rarely entirely unpredictable. There is always a pattern, a reason. Now I must ask you, did you at any point know of Mademoiselle Willoughby's plans to leave, to disappear?" For the first time, Poirot saw something shift behind Mrs. Pennington's controlled exterior. Her fingers, which had been neatly folded in her lap, twitched ever so slightly. She tilted her head and let out a small laugh, but there was an edge to it. "Mon Dieu, Monsieur Poirot, you think she planned this all along, that she faked her own disappearance?" Poirot's lips quirked upward. "I do not believe in coincidences, madame, and I believe there are motivations we have yet to uncover." There was a long pause. Mrs. Pennington's smile faltered for just a moment, and then she leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. "I must admit, Poirot, you are persistent, but I can assure you I know nothing more than what I've already told you." Poirot studied her silently for a moment longer, the tension in the room thickening with each passing second. He had learned enough from years of practice that silence could be a weapon just as powerful as a direct confrontation. And in this case, it was working. Mrs. Pennington was uncomfortable, but she was hiding it well. "I see," Poirot finally said, standing up slowly. "Then we must continue, madame. But I am not finished with you yet. There is more to learn, I am certain of it." With that, Poirot turned on his heel and left the room, leaving Mrs. Pennington to stew in her own thoughts. As he passed through the hallway, he made his way to the small study where Alfred Willoughby awaited. The man was pacing nervously, his hand running through his hair in agitation. "Monsieur Poirot!" Alfred exclaimed as Poirot entered. "What have you learned? Have you confronted Mrs. Pennington?" Poirot smiled thinly. "I have learned much, Monsieur Willoughby, but there is more to uncover. You are right about one thing. Mrs. Pennington is involved, but not in the way you think." Alfred froze, a frown forming on his face. "What do you mean? You're saying she's behind it all, behind Violet's disappearance? Poirot held up a hand. Not exactly. Mrs. Pennington is a player, yes, but she is not the one orchestrating this. There is someone else. Someone who stands to gain far more from Violet's absence than anyone else here. Alfred looked confused. But who? Who else could be involved? Poirot's gaze was piercing, his mind already making the connections. There is a second person, Monsieur Willoughby. Someone who knew Violet's plans intimately. Someone who stands in the shadows, carefully directing this entire drama. You too, monsieur, were part of this, though I do not believe you are guilty. But someone else. Poirot's voice trailed off, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the desk. The solicitor, Alfred muttered, his face growing pale. You think he's involved? Poirot nodded slowly. I do, monsieur, but I believe there is more to him than we realize. I will visit him tomorrow, if he is the one who helped Violet, helped her plan this disappearance. Then he holds the key to this puzzle, and when we discover what he knows, the truth will become clearer. Alfred sank into the chair, his face a mask of distress. But how can we be sure? How do we know we're on the right track? Poirot smiled, his expression calm. Because, Monsieur Willoughby, I have seen the patterns, the way things line up, the way people behave when they are lying. I have already uncovered enough to know that the true criminal is not among us. They are waiting for the moment when they can make their move. And when they do, we will be ready. Poirot stood, turning toward the door. Now we wait. We allow the final pieces to fall into place. As he left the study, Poirot felt an unfamiliar sense of calm. The investigation was reaching its tipping point. Soon, the game would be over, and the truth would be laid bare. The storm outside had finally begun to subside, but the sense of unease in Cleve Manor was as strong as ever. Everyone was a suspect now. It was only a matter of time before one of them revealed their hand. And Poirot would be waiting. The following morning dawned cold and grey, the sky hanging heavy with an ominous weight as if it, too, sensed the tension hanging over Cleve Manor. Poirot awoke early, as was his custom, and after a light breakfast in the quiet solitude of his room, he prepared himself for the day's investigation. The time for mere observation was past. Now the critical moments were arriving, and Poirot's mind worked tirelessly, assembling the pieces of the puzzle. He had a feeling, a sharp instinct honed over years of solving complex cases, that today would bring a breakthrough. Poirot set out for the study, where Alfred Willoughby waited for him. The young man's face was drawn, his eyes hollow with anxiety. Alfred was pacing back and forth when Poirot entered, his face lighting up with a mixture of hope and desperation. Monsieur Poirot, I trust you have made progress, Alfred asked, his voice strained but eager. Poirot nodded slowly, his expression pensive. Progress indeed. But today, Monsieur Willoughby, we must act with care. I believe it is time to pay a visit to Mr. Fitzwilliam, the solicitor. His role in this situation cannot be ignored any longer. Alfred's eyes widened. You suspect him? Poirot's gaze sharpened as he regarded the young man. Not suspect, monsieur. I know. I do not yet know the full extent of his involvement, but I believe he holds the key to understanding Mademoiselle Willoughby's disappearance. The two men exchanged a look of silent agreement. There was no time to waste. The tension in the house was palpable. It could only escalate from here. Poirot knew that if he was correct about Fitzwilliam's role, the man would soon make a move. He always did when he thought he was in control. The journey to Fitzwilliam's office was brief, but Poirot's mind was already running through the possible scenarios in which the solicitor might try to outmaneuver him. He had learned that those who thought themselves clever often failed to see their own flaws, flaws that Poirot was always quick to uncover. Upon arrival, they were shown into a dimly lit office, the scent of old leather and ink lingering in the air. Mr. Fitzwilliam stood at his desk, his back to them as he wrote something on a piece of paper. When he turned around and saw Poirot, a flicker of surprise crossed his face, though it was gone almost instantly, replaced by the same composed, neutral expression that Poirot had come to associate with the man. "Monsieur Poirot," Fitzwilliam said smoothly, "to what do I owe the pleasure of your visit?" Poirot's eyes narrowed as he took a step closer. "Monsieur Fitzwilliam, I am here to ask you some questions. Questions about your client, Mademoiselle Violet Willoughby." At the mention of Violet's name, Fitzwilliam's hand froze mid-motion. Poirot saw the slight tension in his posture, the smallest of shifts, but he said nothing. His expression remained the same. "Ah, yes," Fitzwilliam replied after a beat, his voice perfectly neutral. "I assume you're still concerned about her disappearance? I can assure you, Monsieur Poirot, that I know as much about it as you do. She simply left, without a word, and that is the end of the matter." Poirot's gaze was steady, unyielding. "Is that so? Because I find it difficult to believe, monsieur, that a woman of Mademoiselle Willoughby's nature, someone with wealth, with influence, would simply disappear without leaving any trace behind. No notes, no letters, no indications of where she might have gone. This, monsieur, is most irregular." Fitzwilliam shifted, his eyes flicking toward the door as though considering an escape. Poirot caught the movement, and with it, a subtle but unmistakable sense of panic. The solicitor was beginning to unravel. "Why don't you sit down, Monsieur Poirot?" Fitzwilliam suggested, his tone now a little less composed, but still trying to mask his nervousness. "We can discuss this further. I'm sure there has been some misunderstanding." Poirot remained standing, his hands clasped neatly behind his back. "There is no misunderstanding, monsieur. You are hiding something. The question is not whether you are hiding something, but what you are hiding, and why." The room seemed to grow still, the air thick with tension. Fitzwilliam's eyes flicked to the desk, then back to Poirot, as though searching for an escape. But there was no escaping Poirot's scrutiny. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Fitzwilliam said, his voice betraying a slight tremor now. "I've done nothing wrong. Mademoiselle Willoughby was a client like any other. She had her affairs in order. If she wished to disappear, then I was simply fulfilling her wishes. There's nothing criminal about that." Poirot smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. "Ah, but you see, Monsieur Fitzwilliam, that is where you are mistaken. It is not the disappearance that is so interesting, but the circumstances surrounding it. The hurriedness, the lack of preparation. A woman like Violet Willoughby does not simply vanish without a trace. No, there is something far more deliberate behind this. Something calculated." Fitzwilliam opened his mouth to reply, but Poirot held up a hand, silencing him. "I've seen your records, monsieur. I know about the legal documents you prepared for her. Documents that were unsigned, documents that indicate Mademoiselle Willoughby was preparing for something significant, something momentous. She was preparing to leave for good, but she needed assistance. Your assistance." The solicitor's face paled, but he recovered quickly, a glint of something like irritation flashing in his eyes. "I deny all of this, Monsieur Poirot. What records? What documents? I have nothing of the sort." Poirot tilted his head slightly, watching the man closely. "Your reaction betrays you, Monsieur Fitzwilliam. You are not as calm as you think you are. You claim to know nothing, yet your every word and action tells me otherwise. You had a part in Mademoiselle Willoughby's plan, but the question is, what part?" The solicitor stood, his chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. "I think you are mistaken, monsieur. I have no more to say to you." Poirot did not flinch. "Very well, Monsieur Fitzwilliam, but rest assured, I will be back. You cannot run from the truth, and I will find it, no matter how carefully you try to bury it." As Poirot turned to leave, he could feel the weight of Fitzwilliam's glare following him, the tension still lingering in the room. Alfred Willoughby, who had remained silent through the entire exchange, looked at Poirot with growing anxiety. "Monsieur Poirot, what now? Is it over? Is he the one behind Violet's disappearance?" Poirot shook his head, a faint smile playing at his lips. "No, monsieur. We are not yet finished. There is still much more to uncover. And in the end, the truth will be revealed, not by force, but by the subtle unraveling of the lies that have been woven." Alfred frowned. "But who else could be involved? What are we missing?" Poirot paused, his eyes distant as he considered the question. "That, Monsieur Willoughby, is what we will discover in time. But trust me, the pieces are slowly coming together. The game is far from over." The two men stood in the hallway, staring at the door to Fitzwilliam's office as the storm outside began to stir again, the winds howling through the trees, and in the midst of that storm, Poirot could feel the answer slowly approaching, closer with every passing moment. Poirot and Alfred Willoughby returned to Cleeve Manor in silence. The wind had picked up, lashing the trees with sharp gusts that seemed to echo the turmoil in both their minds. Poirot sat composed in the motor car, hands resting lightly on his cane, his expression unreadable. Alfred, by contrast, was a bundle of nerves, chewing at his thumbnail, eyes fixed on the road ahead but clearly seeing little of it. "He's hiding something," Alfred said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Fitzwilliam, he knows where Violet is, doesn't he?" Poirot did not respond immediately. He glanced out the window, watching as the grey countryside blurred past. Then, in a calm, almost reflective tone, he replied, "Oui, he is hiding something, but we must not be too quick to assign guilt. There is more at play here than mere complicity. Monsieur Fitzwilliam is a man who protects his interests, financial, professional, perhaps even personal. You think he's being blackmailed?" "None. I think he is loyal. To someone. Perhaps not Violet, but someone else. And in his loyalty, he has compromised himself." They arrived back at the manor shortly after midday. Mrs. Weatherby, the housekeeper, met them at the door with an expression of barely veiled apprehension. "There's someone waiting in the drawing-room for you, sir," she told Poirot, casting a quick glance at Alfred. "She didn't give a name, but she insisted you'd want to speak with her." Poirot exchanged a look with Alfred. "A woman, you say? Describe her." "She's well-dressed, in a discreet way, pale, anxious, and foreign, I think." Poirot's eyes lit with interest. "Ah, that is most intriguing. Merci, madame. I shall see her at once." He walked to the drawing-room and paused at the threshold, adjusting his cuffs with his usual precision before stepping inside. A slender woman stood by the fireplace, her gloved hands clasped tightly together. She wore a navy blue coat with a fur collar, and her chestnut hair was coiled at the nape of her neck. Her face, though attractive, bore signs of fatigue, and her large eyes turned quickly toward Poirot as he entered. "You are Hercule Poirot," she said, her accent unmistakably French. He bowed slightly. "At your service, madame." I heard you were investigating the disappearance of Violet Willoughby." "I've come because I think I know something. Something important." Poirot gestured for her to sit. "Then please, madame, let us not waste time. Begin from the beginning. Who are you?" "My name is Céleste Dubois," she said, lowering herself into the chair with a kind of quiet grace. "I was once in Violet's employ. I was her companion when she lived in Paris 3 years ago. She dismissed me when she returned to England, but we stayed in contact occasionally. I've not heard from her in almost a year. Until 3 nights ago." Poirot's eyebrows lifted. "You heard from her?" "No. I saw her. On the Rue Saint-Antoine in Paris." The silence that followed was absolute. Poirot leaned forward. "You are certain of this?" "I am. I called her name, but she turned and fled. I chased after her, but she disappeared into the crowd. I didn't report it at first. I thought perhaps I'd been mistaken. But then I read in Le Figaro about her being declared missing here in England, and then I knew it was her." Poirot tapped his chin. "And what do you believe this means, mademoiselle?" Celeste hesitated. I think she is in hiding. Voluntarily, yes, but also out of fear. She looked terrified. Fear of what? Poirot asked softly. I don't know, but Violet was not a woman who frightened easily. If she's running, it must be from something or someone truly dangerous. Poirot stood and paced the room slowly, the movements deliberate. Merci, Mademoiselle Dubois. You have given me much to consider, but I must ask, did she have enemies in Paris? She hesitated. Yes, one in particular, a man named Jacques Renard. He pursued her. She rejected him. He didn't take it well. There were threats, arguments. She never said what he did, but she was shaken. He was a financier with a reputation for ruthlessness, and he had powerful friends. Poirot turned sharply. Jacques Renard. The name is not unknown to me. You know him? I know of him. A man who prides himself on secrecy, wealthy, intelligent, and dangerous when crossed. If he is involved, then we must tread carefully, very carefully. Poirot dismissed Celeste with a promise to follow up on her account. As she departed, Hastings, who had been watching from the corridor, entered with a troubled look on his face. Renard, that doesn't sound good, Poirot. It is not, mon ami, but it is a piece of the puzzle. Violet Willoughby did not disappear because of inheritance squabbles or a broken engagement. No, this goes deeper. This is about fear, and perhaps something far more sinister. They walked together through the house, the silence between them thoughtful. Hastings, though often baffled by Poirot's conclusions, had long since learned not to interrupt the detective's thought process. Do you believe Violet staged her disappearance? Hastings asked at last. Not alone, but yes, she arranged it. The unsigned documents at Fitzwilliam's office, the sudden vanishing act, the vague witnesses. And now, this sighting in Paris. This cannot be coincidence. But the question remains, why now, and who helped her? They paused outside the study. Poirot turned to Hastings with a spark of resolution in his eye. We must speak again with Lady Tremaine. Her connections with Violet, her insistence on Fitzwilliam's honesty, there is something there. Something hidden beneath her calm exterior. Lady Tremaine received them with a measured poise. She was seated in the solarium, sipping tea, her grey hair pulled back, tightly, the lace of her collar immaculate. Monsieur Poirot, she said coolly, I assume this is not a social call. Your assumption is correct, madame, Poirot replied, sitting opposite her. We have received new information regarding Violet's whereabouts. In Paris. Lady Tremaine's expression did not change, but she set her teacup down with a trace more force than necessary. Indeed. And do you believe it? I do, but it raises questions. Questions only you, I believe, can answer. I'm not sure what you mean. Poirot fixed her with a steady gaze. You knew about Violet's fears, her desire to disappear. Her decision was not made in isolation. She confided in someone. I believe that someone was you. Lady Tremaine's hand stilled over the edge of her cup. She came to me 6 months ago, she said at last. She was terrified. She didn't tell me everything, but she spoke of someone following her, someone watching. I asked her who, but she refused to say. She said she was being hunted, that she had to disappear. Poirot leaned forward. Why did you not come forward before? Because I swore I would protect her, and I didn't trust the authorities not to ruin everything. You must understand, Monsieur Poirot. She believed her life was in danger. She begged me to help, and I did. Did Fitzwilliam help as well? She hesitated. Yes. He arranged the logistics. I financed it. We kept it quiet, but I never imagined it would come to this, an investigation, scandal, possible exposure. I wanted only to preserve her safety. Poirot stood, bowing slightly. Madame, you have done what you thought was right, but the danger may not be over. I must find Violet, and I must find out who she is hiding from, and why. As they left the solarium, Hastings shook his head in astonishment. You were right, Poirot. She knew. But where does this leave us now? Poirot's voice was soft, yet certain. It leaves us on the edge of revelation, Hastings. Violet Willoughby disappeared to escape something, or someone, and that someone is growing nervous. We must move quickly before he decides to act again. They stepped into the hallway, the echo of footsteps in the great house reverberating like distant thunder. Poirot's eyes gleamed, and his mind, ever methodical, turned once more to the game now fully in motion. The wind had died down by the time Poirot and Hastings returned to the study, a sense of quiet urgency hanging in the air. The manor felt like a house with too many secrets, its polished floors and dark wood panels concealing more than just the usual dust. Poirot had been gathering his thoughts throughout their walk back, piecing together the puzzle of Violet Willoughby's disappearance, but as always, he was careful not to share too much too soon. "Something doesn't sit right, Hastings," Poirot said, his tone pensive. "Violet's disappearance, the cover-up, the unexpected, involvement of Lady Tremaine, it's all too orchestrated. Someone is pulling strings, but the question is who and why." Hastings took a seat near the fire, watching the flickering flames dance. "But you still believe Violet is hiding, right? That she's alive?" "Alive, yes, but hiding from something much larger than herself. She's not merely running from a personal crisis. There is something far more insidious at play." Poirot's sharp eyes narrowed, studying the small details around him, his surroundings, the mannerisms of those who had spoken to him so far. "It is not only Violet's life that is at risk, Hastings. It is something else, something the people around her are protecting." "But the people around her—" Hastings paused, trying to process the convoluted web of deceit they were beginning to unravel. "Lady Tremaine, Fitzwilliam, Celeste Dubois, all of them have been hiding something, but they've all seemed to act in Violet's best interests. Why would they have a hand in something sinister?" Poirot slowly made his way to the desk, adjusting the papers before him. "I do not think they know the full picture, Hastings. Lady Tremaine knew of Violet's fears, yes, and she acted to protect her. But what if she was protecting Violet from someone she also feared? What if Violet knew something she should not have?" The words hung in the air, both unsettling and revealing. Poirot leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him, his thoughts racing. "There is something deeper at work here, a force behind the curtain that is not as easily seen as we might think." Hastings, though usually quick to follow Poirot's logic, struggled to connect the dots. A force behind the curtain. But who could be so powerful that Violet, Lady Tremaine, would be afraid to expose them? Poirot smiled faintly, a glimmer of something calculated in his eyes. "That, my dear Hastings, is the very question we are going to answer. But first, we need to speak to someone who is likely to know more than they've said." The following day, Poirot requested an audience with the local constable, a Mr. Kendrick, a man with a reputation for diligence and attention to detail. Poirot had already observed the constable's reactions when questioned about Violet's disappearance. There was something in his manner that had unsettled Poirot. A slight hesitation, a nervous glance when certain names were mentioned. When the constable arrived at Cleeve Manor, he was polite but clearly anxious. Poirot, of course, took no offense. He had been in enough such situations to know that anxiety was often a sign of a guilty conscience, or at least a conscience troubled by something hidden. "Ah, Monsieur Kendrick," Poirot said as he gestured for the man to sit. "Please, be at ease. We have no need for dramatics, as they say. We simply wish to continue our investigation." Kendrick sat with his back stiff, his eyes darting about the room, before fixing on Poirot. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I'm at your service. What more would you like to know?" Poirot's gaze was steady, calculating. "We were speaking earlier about Violet Willoughby's disappearance. It seems you have had some prior dealings with her, yes?" The constable shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I knew Miss Willoughby, but only in passing. I didn't have much to do with her directly, if that's what you mean." Poirot smiled softly. "I do not wish to pry into matters that are not pertinent to our investigation, Monsieur Kendrick, but I believe there is more that you are not telling me. Tell me, have you ever heard of a man named Jacques Renard?" Kendrick's face paled slightly, and his hands fumbled with the edge of his coat. "Renard? No, Monsieur Poirot, I don't know him." Poirot's expression did not change, but his voice grew firmer. "Are you certain?" "Renard's name is not so obscure, monsieur. He has been known to make certain arrangements in the past, arrangements that might be of interest to someone like yourself." Kendrick hesitated, his eyes darting again. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke. "I've heard the name, but I don't know much about him. I never met him personally, not until a few weeks ago." Poirot leaned in, sensing a shift. "Go on." Kendrick glanced around the room as if making sure they were alone. "I had a visitor, a man who came to me under the pretext of offering information on a matter unrelated to Miss Willoughby. He wasn't interested in any of the usual things, nothing about Violet's disappearance or her inheritance. But he did mention her name. He wanted to know if I had seen her, if she was still in England." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And this man was?" He didn't give a name, just said he was a friend of Violet's, said he had business with her and needed to know where she was staying. When I told him I couldn't help, he seemed agitated, told me not to get involved in matters that didn't concern me. Then he left." Poirot sat back, his mind racing. "And you did not think to tell anyone of this? To report the incident?" Kendrick swallowed hard. I didn't want to cause trouble. He was a scary sort of man. Like I said, I didn't know him, but something about him. He wasn't the sort of person you want to upset. I thought it best to leave it alone." Poirot studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "You did well, Monsieur Kendrick. You did what you thought was right, but now we must put aside any fear and follow the clues where they lead us." As Kendrick left, Hastings took a step toward Poirot. "What do you make of that?" Poirot turned slowly, his lips curling into a slight, enigmatic smile. "It seems, Hastings, that we are not the only ones looking for Violet, and I believe this mysterious man and Jacques Renard are far more involved in this story than anyone has dared admit." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "You think Renard is still hunting for her?" "I do, but not for the reasons we might expect. We must find Violet before he does, or before anyone else who would wish her harm. The game is afoot, Hastings, and we are running out of time." The investigation had taken another turn, the threads of deception and intrigue weaving tighter with each passing hour. Poirot could feel it now. Something significant was on the verge of being revealed. All that remained was to uncover the last piece of the puzzle. And he knew, deep down, that Violet Willoughby was not running from a mere man. She was running from a powerful secret, one that, if exposed, would unravel everything. The rain had started to fall again by the time Poirot and Hastings returned to the manor, the soft patter of raindrops against the windows adding to the tension in the room. Poirot, deep in thought, sat in silence for several minutes, his hands steepled beneath his chin. Hastings, eager for the next step in their investigation, glanced at his friend, but waited for Poirot to break the silence. "I have a feeling, Hastings," Poirot finally spoke, his voice steady and calculating, "that we are approaching the heart of the matter. Everything is now pointing to the fact that Violet Willoughby knew something she should not have. The question is not whether she is hiding, but why she is hiding and from whom. But we know that Renard, this man, is looking for her," Hastings said, leaning forward. "We know she's in danger, but what could she have known? What's worth this much risk?" Poirot nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly. "That, mon ami, is what we must uncover. There is something about Violet's past, something tied to her inheritance, to the people she's been surrounded by. That is significant. But there is another piece of this puzzle that has eluded us, and it has nothing to do with the people we have questioned so far." Hastings blinked in confusion. "Another piece?" "Yes. We have focused so far on the people around Violet, Lady Tremaine, Fitzwilliam, even the mysterious Jacques Renard. But what if the key to understanding Violet's actions lies not with them, but with the very place she grew up? The manor, the family history, the land itself. Violet's decision to disappear was not merely an act of fear. It was a response to something deeper, a long-buried secret she could no longer ignore. Hastings furrowed his brow. "But how does the manor tie into this? It's just a house, isn't it?" "Ah, Hastings," Poirot said, shaking his head with a smile. "It is never just a house. In these matters, the past often lingers far longer than one expects. The manor holds memories, secrets, and sometimes even debts. Debts that are not so easily repaid." Poirot stood and walked toward the window, looking out at the rain-swept garden, his mind racing. It is clear that Violet's decision to vanish was no simple escape. She had to have known that by disappearing, she would draw attention, and not only from Jacques Renard, but from others who might wish her harm. There was something she was trying to avoid, something that could not be ignored any longer. Hastings stood as well, walking to join his friend by the window. "So you believe the answers lie in Violet's past, and this manor?" "I do," Poirot said, turning to face him. "The manor holds more than the physical traces of Violet's life. It holds the answers to why she is running and why she was willing to risk everything." The next morning, Poirot and Hastings made their way to the study of the manor, where they had earlier spoken with the local constable. Poirot had requested that Lady Tremaine meet them there, in private, away from the prying eyes of the other inhabitants. When she arrived, she seemed more composed than Poirot had expected. Her demeanor calm, but he could see the strain in her eyes. There was a desperation to her that had not been there before. "Monsieur Poirot," Lady Tremaine greeted him, her voice soft but firm. "What have you discovered?" Poirot gestured for her to sit. "It is clear, madame, that you care deeply for Violet, but there are questions that must be answered, questions that I am certain you know the answers to." She hesitated, her eyes flickering toward Hastings before returning to Poirot. I don't understand, Poirot. What do you mean?" Poirot's gaze never wavered. "There is more to Violet's disappearance than you have told us. She's not just hiding from Jacques Renard or anyone else who might wish to harm her. There is a deeper reason. I believe it is tied to this house, to the history of this place." Lady Tremaine's expression shifted slightly, a trace of concern crossing her features. "This house? I do not know what you mean." Poirot's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "Violet's inheritance, the property, the land, it is tied to something far older than you or I. I believe Violet knew something about this land, something dark, and it is that knowledge that caused her to fear for her life." Lady Tremaine's hand tightened around the edge of the chair, but she said nothing for several moments. Finally she spoke, her voice low. "You are right, Poirot. Violet did know something, but it was not what you think." Poirot tilted his head, intrigued. "What do you mean?" She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "There is a family secret, a curse, if you will, that has plagued the Willoughby family for generations. Violet's father, Richard Willoughby, was involved in something I cannot bring myself to speak of fully. But I can tell you this. Violet was not the first to seek a way out. Her father tried to escape it, and he failed." Poirot's heart quickened. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. "What was this curse?" Hastings asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "What does it have to do with Violet?" Lady Tremaine's eyes darkened, her hands trembling. "It is a matter of wealth, power, and dark secrets that stretch back to the time of Violet's great-grandfather. The family fortune was built on something that should never have been done, something that stains the Willoughby name. I don't know all the details, but I know this much. Violet's father tried to put an end to it, to distance the family from the past. But Violet found out the truth. She could not ignore it, and that is why she disappeared. Poirot absorbed the gravity of her words, the pieces finally falling into place. And this secret, this knowledge, it is the reason Violet sought to disappear. She knew too much, but if she knows the truth, then so must Jacques Renard. And it is clear that Renard has been seeking her for a reason. Lady Tremain's voice was trembling now. Yes, Monsieur Poirot. He wants Violet to silence the past, but she will not. She cannot. Poirot stood, his mind working through the implications of this new information. Then we are not only dealing with a family secret, we are dealing with a conspiracy to protect that secret at all costs. Exactly, Lady Tremaine whispered, her face pale, and Violet's life is at stake. Poirot turned to Hastings, his face hardening. We must act quickly, Hastings. If Renard is as involved as I suspect, then he will stop at nothing to find Violet, and once he does— He let the sentence hang in the air. They had no time to waste. The race was on to find Violet before Renard, and whoever else had a stake in this dark family secret, could reach her first. Poirot wasted no time. His mind was sharp, the pieces of the puzzle now aligning with an alarming clarity. Renard's involvement was no longer a suspicion, it was a certainty. But the question remained: who else was part of this intricate web? The stakes were higher than he had initially realized, and Violet Willoughby was not just a runaway heiress. She was at the center of a dangerous game, one that could have far-reaching consequences. We must act swiftly, Hastings, Poirot said, his voice as determined as ever. The past is not content to stay buried, and Violet's discovery will cost her dearly if we do not find her first. Lady Tremaine sat silently, her face drawn with fear. It was clear that she was haunted by what she had just revealed, but she gave no protest as Poirot's plans began to take shape. Her voice, when it came, was trembling. What should we do now, Poirot? Where will Violet be? Poirot stood by the window again, staring out at the misty grounds of the manor. He was silent for a moment, thinking deeply. Finally, he turned to face them. We must search the estate. Violet may have left behind clues, something that will tell us where she is hiding. If Renard has been after her all along, he has made his move. But we must be quicker. Hastings looked from Poirot to Lady Tremaine, his expression a mixture of concern and impatience. Should we involve the authorities? Surely they'll be able to help track down Renard. Poirot's gaze hardened. The authorities have already been deceived. Renard is a master of manipulation, Hastings. He will have covered his tracks too well. No, we must find Violet ourselves. Only then can we uncover the truth of the matter. Poirot's resolve was unshakable. They set to work immediately, splitting up to search the grounds of the manor and its extensive library. The mansion itself felt oppressive, the weight of its secrets seeping through the walls. As Poirot combed through the library, a thought flickered in his mind. Had Violet hidden something here, in plain sight? She had been desperate to get away from Renard, yet she had stayed behind. Perhaps she had left a trace for someone to find. A map, a note, anything. The hours passed, and the investigation took them into the evening. Poirot was meticulous, as always, sifting through old family records and books. It was Hastings who found the clue first. His eyes alighted on a small leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age, hidden behind a stack of old volumes. As he pulled it from its place, a folded letter fell to the ground. Poirot's eyes widened. Hastings, quickly, bring it here. Hastings carefully picked up the letter and handed it over. Poirot's fingers ran over the paper, feeling the weight of the words contained within. It was an old letter, far older than anything Violet could have written herself. The handwriting was elegant, but its message was clear and disturbing. This letter, Poirot murmured, reading it aloud. To my beloved, I have made the arrangements. The land will be ours once more. You must prepare for what is to come. The past cannot be erased, but it can be concealed. Soon, no one will know the truth." Poirot's expression darkened. "This is it, Hastings. This is the key to everything." Hastings leaned in, his voice filled with confusion. "But who wrote this? And what does it mean?" Poirot looked at him, his face grim. "This letter was written by Violet's great-grandfather, the man who initiated the dark chapter in the Willoughby family's history. And it seems Violet knew of it. She was not only running from Jacques Renard, but from the consequences of the very legacy her family had tried to bury." Hastings felt a chill run down his spine. So Violet's great-grandfather was involved in something terrible. Poirot nodded. "Yes. This letter speaks of an arrangement regarding the land that the Willoughby family holds so dearly. There is something about the land that is both valuable and cursed. Violet discovered this truth, and it is why she has disappeared." Hastings felt a growing sense of urgency. But why didn't Violet just tell someone? Why did she choose to run? Poirot looked at the letter once more. His eyes narrowed. "Because, Hastings, the truth was too dangerous. Those who have held power over the Willoughby estate will stop at nothing to protect the secret of what has been done. Violet feared that, once the past was exposed, those who were still part of this conspiracy would move swiftly to ensure her silence." The weight of this realization sank in. Violet had stumbled upon something much larger than herself, a secret so powerful that it had driven her into hiding. But where was she now? Poirot turned to Lady Tremaine, who had been watching in silence. "Lady Tremaine, I must ask you, where did Violet's great-grandfather keep his most prized possessions? Were there hidden rooms, perhaps, places where important documents were kept?" Lady Tremaine's face remained pale, but her eyes grew distant. "There is a vault, an old one. It's beneath the house. Only the head of the family has access. My late husband never spoke of it, but I know of its existence." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "That is where we will go next. If Violet discovered the vault, then she may have uncovered something inside it, something that could explain everything." The vault was located beneath the house, hidden beneath layers of stone and wood. It was a damp, cold place, filled with the smell of earth and dust. The walls were thick, as if to keep something or someone locked away from the world. As Poirot and Hastings stepped inside, they found a large wooden chest, its surface worn with age. With a quiet click, Poirot unlocked it, revealing the contents inside. The chest held papers, dozens of them. But one particular document caught Poirot's attention. It was an old, yellowed deed, written in the same elegant handwriting as the letter. It was the deed to the land, a deed that detailed the Willoughby family's original ownership of the estate and a strange clause that had remained hidden for generations. The clause was clear. The land could only pass into the hands of a rightful heir, and should the heir ever wish to sell it, the land would be taken by force, by any means necessary. "This is it," Poirot said, his voice cold. "This is the reason Violet was so desperate. The land, the estate, it is the key. But it is not just about money or power. It is about keeping the past buried. Violet knew too much, and now she was paying the price for it." The pieces had fallen into place. Violet had discovered the truth, and those who stood to lose everything were willing to stop at nothing to protect their secret. The next move would be critical. Poirot now knew who was truly behind the conspiracy, but the question was whether they could find Violet before it was too late. "We must find her," Poirot said, his voice firm with resolve, "and we must do so before those who would silence her can reach her. First—" The clock was ticking. Poirot's mind worked at an astonishing pace as he pieced together the labyrinthine trail of deception, his thoughts focused and sharp. The mystery had taken on a much larger scope than he had initially imagined. Violet's disappearance was not simply the desperate flight of a young woman trying to escape her past. It was the final act in a long-buried conspiracy, one rooted in greed, betrayal, and the darkest of family secrets. "Time is against us," Poirot murmured, as he and Hastings moved through the darkened corridors of the Willoughby estate. The urgency in his voice was undeniable. "We must find her quickly, before those who have driven her to this desperation make their next move." Lady Tremaine, still shaken by the revelation, joined them in the search. Her face was pale, the weight of the truth heavy upon her. "Where do we even begin? What if she's already gone too far?" Poirot's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of resolve in his eyes. "She has not gone far," he assured her. "Violet is still within the estate. I believe she has left a trail, one that leads us directly to her." Hastings, who had been following Poirot's every step, raised an eyebrow. "A trail, Poirot? What kind of trail?" Poirot paused, his sharp gaze scanning the room. "A psychological trail. Violet is not simply running. She is playing a game just as we are, and she has left clues for us to find. The question is whether we can find them before it's too late." As they moved deeper into the house, Poirot's mind raced. The family's legacy, Violet's fear of the past, the letter from her great-grandfather, and now this deed to the land. All of it pointed to a singular conclusion. Violet was not merely trying to escape. She was trying to expose something, and in doing so had become a target. A dangerous game had been set in motion, one in which her survival depended on finding the right moment to reveal the truth. The three of them descended into the lower levels of the estate, where the labyrinthine hallways seemed to grow colder and more oppressive. It was in this very house, in its damp and shadowed corners, that the Willoughby family's darkest secrets had been hidden away. As they reached a narrow, forgotten hallway, Poirot stopped suddenly, his attention fixed on the faintest of marks on the stone floor. "Look," he said softly, pointing to the ground. Hastings bent down, inspecting the mark. It was a faint scratch, barely noticeable amidst the dust and grime. "What is it, Poirot?" Poirot knelt down to examine it closely, his fingers brushing over the rough stone. "A clue," he said. "A small one, but telling. Violet has walked here, and she has left this mark for us to find." Hastings straightened up. "What do we do with it?" Poirot's lips curled into a small smile, though it was tinged with a sense of urgency. "We follow it. It will lead us to her. But we must move swiftly, for every moment we waste is another moment those who wish her harm grow closer." With a renewed sense of purpose, the group pressed on, Poirot's every step calculated, every action precise. The faint trail led them through the winding corridors, down into even darker recesses of the estate. The air seemed thicker, heavier here, as if the house itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. At last, they came to a small hidden door tucked away in the corner of the cellar. The door was old, its wood warped and splintered with age. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he approached it. "This is it," he said, "the door that Violet chose." He turned the handle with careful precision, the door creaking open to reveal a narrow staircase leading further underground. The air was damp and musty, the darkness palpable. Poirot hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. Hastings followed closely behind, Lady Tremaine lingering a few steps behind them. The stairs led to a small, low-ceilinged room, its walls lined with shelves containing jars and bottles of strange, ancient substances. The room was musty and oppressive, filled with the faintest smell of decay. Poirot's eyes swept across the room, and then, at last, he saw it. A small desk tucked into the far corner, a stack of papers scattered across its surface. "Violet was here," Poirot said softly, his voice filled with a quiet satisfaction. "She must have been going through these papers, searching for something." Hastings stepped forward, his hand hovering over the papers, uncertain. What could she have been looking for, Poirot? Poirot's gaze fixed on a particular stack of documents, old and brittle. His fingers moved with delicate care, picking them up one by one, his eyes scanning the text. As he read, his face tightened and his voice grew low, almost inaudible. This is the truth, Hastings, the final part of the puzzle. Violet discovered it. She learned the full extent of the conspiracy, the reasons for her great-grandfather's actions. Hastings stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean, Poirot? What did she find?" Poirot did not immediately answer. Instead, he laid the papers down on the desk and began to sift through them carefully, his mind whirring as he processed the information. Violet's great-grandfather was not only involved in the land transactions, he was part of a much larger scheme, one that spanned decades. The estate, the land, it was never meant to be passed down to Violet or any other family member. It was a trap designed to ensnare those who sought to uncover the truth. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. Her great-grandfather made a pact with Renard, a deal to conceal the truth, to keep the land's secrets buried. In exchange, Renard would help cover up the more unsavory elements of the Willoughby family's past. Hastings stared at Poirot in shock. But Violet, she must have known all of this. She was trying to stop it, wasn't she? Poirot nodded gravely. Yes, she knew too much. And those who would stop her knew that the moment she found the truth, they would have to act swiftly to prevent her from revealing it. The room seemed to grow even darker, the shadows closing in. Poirot felt the weight of the truth settling on his shoulders. Violet had uncovered something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The game was no longer just about land or inheritance. It was about survival. "Come, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice filled with renewed determination. "We must find Violet before it is too late. This mystery is far from over, and the truth must be revealed. There is no more time to waste." With those words, Poirot turned and headed toward the door, his mind already calculating their next move. The trail was growing cold, but there was still hope. Hope that they could find Violet before the forces that sought to silence her could close in. The game was not over. Not yet. The tension was palpable as Poirot, Hastings, and Lady Tremaine hurried back up the stairs, the weight of the papers still fresh in Poirot's mind. He could feel the danger closing in, the mystery tightening around them like an invisible vice. Every step felt like it could be their last before the truth came crashing down on them. Violet had uncovered a legacy of deception, but now her life was in jeopardy. And yet, as Poirot's mind raced with possibilities, one thought rang true. Time was slipping away, and there was no room for hesitation. "Poirot!" Lady Tremaine whispered urgently, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders. "Where do you think she has gone? What does she hope to achieve by all this?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with sharp understanding as he continued to move purposefully, his strides unhurried, though every movement betrayed a mind working with machine-like precision. "It is not about what Violet hopes to achieve, but rather what she fears. She fears the past catching up with her, and the present closing in on her as well." "The present?" Hastings asked, his brow furrowing. "I don't understand." Poirot slowed his pace as they reached the top of the stairs. "Violet has become the key to the family's dark history. She is the one who will either expose it all or bury it once and for all. But those who would silence her are already aware of her knowledge, and they are closing in." Lady Tremaine's face was pale, the worry clear in her eyes. "But what could she do, Poirot? She doesn't have the power to stop all of this on her own." Poirot stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing in thought. "That, my dear Lady Tremaine, is precisely what makes Violet so dangerous to those who have plotted against her. She may not have the power to stop it directly, but she can make it impossible to hide the truth. And that, in the hands of someone like her, is just as powerful." Hastings, still piecing together the puzzle, glanced at Poirot with a mixture of admiration and confusion. So what now? How do we find her before she disappears for good? Poirot gave a small smile, a glimmer of something akin to triumph in his gaze. We must return to where she began this journey. She has left us the clues, Hastings. She may be running from something, but she is not running blind. Everything we need is right before us. All we must do is look. They moved swiftly through the corridors, Poirot leading the way, his keen eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. It wasn't long before they reached the old library, the place where Violet had hidden the key to the Willoughby family's past. A sense of dread seemed to hang in the air, a tangible weight that made it hard to breathe. The house, with its ancient walls and long-forgotten corners, seemed to sigh under the pressure of its own secrets. Poirot paused before the library's entrance. "This is where she began," he murmured, his fingers gently brushing the doorframe. Here, Violet discovered what the rest of us had overlooked. Hastings looked around, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "But we've already searched this place. There's nothing left to find." Poirot turned to face him, a knowing smile on his lips. "Ah, Hastings, that is where you are mistaken. The mind is like a puzzle. Sometimes it is not the obvious pieces that fit. Sometimes it is the ones that we overlook." With that, Poirot stepped into the library, moving toward the desk where Violet had sat just days before. His fingers hovered over the scattered papers, and he bent down to pick up a small, inconspicuous notebook. As he flipped it open, his eyes scanned the faded pages with meticulous care. "It is here," he murmured softly. "In this notebook, that Violet has laid out the final piece of the puzzle." Hastings leaned in, trying to make sense of the symbols and scribbled notes. "What does it mean, Poirot?" Poirot didn't respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on the cryptic markings, and his brow furrowed as he traced the path of her thoughts. "It is not just a code, Hastings," he said, his voice low. "It is a map that leads to the very heart of the Willoughby family's secrets." The room seemed to grow colder as Poirot continued to pore over the notebook. It was clear to him now that Violet had been following the same path, piecing together the family's history and uncovering the truth hidden beneath the surface. But she had been playing a dangerous game, a game where the stakes were not just her family's fortune, but her very life. "The land," Poirot said suddenly, his eyes alight with realization. "The land was never meant to be owned. It was a tool, a means to an end. And Violet's great-grandfather knew this. He knew that by controlling the land, he could control the entire family." Lady Tremaine, who had been standing quietly behind them, let out a sharp breath. But Violet's father, the will. He left everything to her, and she never knew why. She thought it was her inheritance, her birthright. Poirot shook his head. "No, it was never her inheritance, Lady Tremaine. It was a trap, a carefully laid trap meant to lure Violet into this very situation. Her father was merely a pawn in a larger game, and the true players have been manipulating her every step of the way." Hastings turned to Poirot, his face a mixture of disbelief and realization. Then the letter, the deed to the land. It wasn't about the property at all. It was a symbol of power. Poirot nodded gravely. "Exactly, Hastings. The land was a symbol of control, not just of wealth, but of history itself. Violet's great-grandfather wanted to ensure that the family's past was never unearthed, and to do that, he had to keep Violet in the dark." "But why didn't Violet's father tell her the truth?" Lady Tremaine asked, her voice shaking. "Why let her be caught in all this?" Poirot's gaze was distant, lost in thought. Her father, like so many others, was a victim of his circumstances. He believed in protecting Violet from the truth, but in doing so, he sealed her fate. He left her the key, but never the knowledge to truly understand it. The silence that followed was heavy, as if the very air in the room was thickening with the weight of Poirot's words. Then he turned back to the desk, his fingers brushing the edges of the notebook. "We are close now," Poirot said, a spark of determination in his eyes. "We have the final clue. Violet is on the verge of revealing everything, but we must act quickly before those who wish to silence her can do so." Hastings nodded in agreement, a sense of urgency in his movements. "Then what's our next move, Poirot?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "We must find Violet before it's too late. The truth cannot be allowed to remain buried any longer." The game had changed. Now it was a race against time, and Poirot, with his unshakable confidence, was determined to win it. Poirot moved swiftly through the dimly lit hallways of the Willoughby estate, his mind calculating, moving with an almost rhythmic precision. Every step seemed measured, deliberate, as though he were counting the moments left before everything came to a head. The revelation in the library had been a turning point, but the game was far from over. The final pieces were in place, yet the puzzle remained incomplete. Violet was still out there, and he had to find her before the consequences of her actions became irreversible. Hastings, still trailing behind, could sense the urgency in Poirot's every movement. The Belgian detective had always been focused, but tonight there was something in his demeanor that spoke of a much deeper resolve. It wasn't just the case anymore. It was Violet's life, and with it the last remnants of a legacy that, if uncovered, would unravel everything. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice breaking the silence. "Where exactly are we going? Shouldn't we be looking for Violet?" Poirot did not break his stride. "We are going to the place where everything began, the place where Violet's great-grandfather left his mark on this family. If she is to be found anywhere, Hastings, it will be there." Hastings frowned, still trying to piece everything together. "But we've already searched the study, the library." Yes, Poirot interrupted, his voice soft but firm. "But you are missing something, my friend. Violet's great-grandfather, for all his cunning, made one fatal mistake. He underestimated the power of the human mind. He did not realize that those who follow the clues can see the truth where others see only smoke and mirrors." They reached the back of the house, to a wing that had been sealed for years, almost as if the passage of time itself had forgotten it. The doors were ancient, the brass handles tarnished and almost invisible in the gloom of the evening. The house had always been shrouded in mystery, a maze of hidden rooms and forgotten corners. Yet there was one place that even Violet had not dared to enter, the study of her great-grandfather. Lady Tremaine, who had followed them quietly, stood at the door. "Are you certain this is the right place?" she asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Poirot looked at her with a sharp, penetrating gaze. "I'm certain. You see, my dear lady, Violet's great-grandfather was not only a man of wealth and power, he was a man of obsession. His obsession was with control, with keeping the family's past locked away, hidden from all eyes. And to achieve this, he built more than just walls. He built them in his mind." With a single, deliberate movement, Poirot grasped the tarnished handle and turned. The door creaked open, revealing a room that had been untouched by time, untouched by the world outside. Dust clung to the furniture, the air thick with the scent of old leather and secrets long buried. The room was a study, its shelves lined with ancient books, scrolls, and manuscripts. It was clear this was where the real work had been done, the work that would alter the fate of the Willoughby family. Lady Tremaine gasped. "This is where it all happened, isn't it?" Poirot stepped into the room, his gaze sweeping across the space. "Yes, this is where Violet's great-grandfather played his game. It was here that he made sure no one would ever uncover the truth. But Violet, clever as she is, found the keys. And now we must find what she uncovered." He moved toward the desk in the center of the room, a large, imposing piece of furniture that seemed to hold an air of authority in itself. The surface was cluttered with papers, ledgers, and ancient ink bottles. It was here that the great-grandfather had written his plans, and it was here that Violet must have found something that set everything into motion. Poirot began to methodically sort through the papers. Hastings and Lady Tremaine hovered nearby, watching the detective's every move, sensing the tension in the air as Poirot's fingers glided over the yellowed pages with precision. "There is something," Poirot murmured, almost to himself, as his hand came to rest on a small, hidden compartment beneath the desk. With a swift movement, he opened it, revealing an old, intricately carved box. Hastings leaned forward. "What is it, Poirot?" Poirot didn't answer at first. He was studying the box, his eyes narrowing. Slowly, he lifted the lid, revealing an assortment of documents bound together with a piece of red ribbon. The pages were worn, but they were clearly significant. Poirot's eyes flicked over the writing, his mind working swiftly, piecing the words together. "What is it?" Lady Tremaine asked again, her voice trembling. Poirot held up the bundle of papers. "These, my friends, are Violet's inheritance. Not the land, as she thought. No, this is what her great-grandfather truly meant to give her, control over the family's darkest secret." The air seemed to grow colder as Poirot continued. Violet's great-grandfather knew that the family's wealth would not last forever, but he knew that control over what people believed about the Willoughby name, would. These papers contain a history that was never meant to be revealed. Hastings' brow furrowed. But how does this relate to Violet? Why would her father have left her this? Poirot's gaze flickered to Hastings, his expression unreadable. Because Violet was the last piece of the puzzle, her father believed he could protect her from this truth, but in doing so, he ensured that she would be caught in the web of her great-grandfather's legacy. He thought he could keep it hidden, but Violet is too clever. She has uncovered what they all wanted buried. Lady Tremaine stepped forward, looking at the papers with a mixture of awe and fear. "What happens now, Poirot?" Poirot turned to face her, his voice steady but full of purpose. "Now we find Violet, and we ensure that she is safe. There are those who would go to any lengths to stop her from revealing the truth, but they will not succeed. Not while I am here." Hastings nodded, his expression resolute. "We can't let anyone get to her first." Poirot smiled thinly, his gaze already sharpening, his mind racing. "Indeed, Hastings. We cannot allow the truth to be silenced again." The game had entered its final stage. The pieces were on the board, and the end was near. The only question that remained was whether they could find Violet before it was too late. As Poirot gathered the papers into his hands, he knew that this final confrontation would reveal everything. There was no turning back now.